the great Jay Bilas from the Worldwide Leader in Sports. How are you, Jay?
I am doing great, Rich. How are you?
What are you like on the first day of the tournament?
What am I like?
Yeah.
Well, after the 25-hour marathon, I'm a little bit of a growling bear.
Is that the name? Is that the nickname of Montana? Should I get ready for that tonight against my alma mater, Jay?
They're the Grizzlies.
Okay.
I don't know that they're necessarily growling, but I wouldn't worry too much about your alma mater. I think they're in pretty good shape.
No, it's interesting, Jay, because it seems that the tournament selection committee rewards teams that are on fire all season long. They reward teams that are thought to be top 10 and then finish top 10. And then the teams that build and mold and get ready for tournament time, those teams, I guess they don't get rewarded with top seeds or in the case of Michigan, a location that's geographically sound for them. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, the locations are based upon the seed. So the when you go down the seed line, so if Michigan was like the third, number 3 or whatever it was, then the higher seeds get priority. So, I'm not crazy about the way they do that geographically, but that's just a function of the bracketing principles they use. The selection, I thought, left a lot to be desired this year. And I'm not a fan. Look, the committee is full of great people, but it changes all the time. So every time there's a new chair, it goes in a different direction. And I'm not a big fan, Rich, of sort of the committee sending messages. I don't think that's their charge. I think the charge is to take the best teams after the automatic qualifiers are in. And I think they made a bunch of mistakes in that regard. I don't look at it where, when they say full body of work and then they complain that in a non-conference season the team didn't go on the road enough, you're saying, wait a minute, if they get enough road games in their conference season, if you're saying full body of work, why should that matter? I think they make a lot of mistakes, but the good news is no matter how many mistakes they make, we always have a good tournament. But you make seeding mistakes, and it affects the bracket. And we've seen it in past years where Kentucky was an 8, and there was no way they were an 8, and they wound up beating Wichita State, so it was unfair to Wichita State. You could argue it was unfair to Kentucky to have to play a number 1, but they got paired with a number 1 that they were just as good as they were a 4 seed that year. And they did a lot of that in this year's tournament. There are a lot of seeds that were off, and there were a bunch of teams that got in where you say, like, take Arizona State, for example. And look, Bobby Hurley's team had a good year, but they did all their work at the beginning of the year, and they didn't win a road game after Christmas. And USC, who lost in the first round of the NIT, or won in the first round of the NIT, but USC, they finished second in their league. Arizona State finished 9th. And USC went to the title game of their tournament, and Arizona State was out in the first round. And you're going, well, wait a minute, how does that work? That doesn't make any sense.
So, in terms of underseeding, what would you say here? Arizona at 4. Where would you peg before we start moving on to actual games being played?
Oh man, there were a bunch of them, but there are a bunch of them. But I'd say the ones at the top of the bracket that really make the most impact, I would say that Michigan State as a 3 was totally misseeded. Michigan State should have been right with Xavier on the 1 line, and they were 29-4 and won the Big Ten outright. And just because they lost to Michigan in the Big Ten tournament, that shouldn't have disqualified them. When you're looking at teams that had double-digit losses that were contending for 2 seeds and 1 seeds, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I do think Arizona was underseeded as a 4. And, but overall, they're within shouting distance on some of them, but and they moved a bunch of teams up and down the seed line based upon whether they had another team in their league that was in the same bracket. And I'm not crazy about that either. I think all these teams play so much and sometimes avoid, they might only play a team in their league once. I don't think you mess with the seeding based upon, hey, they're going to play a team in that came from their league. So what? Like just play.
Jay Bilas here on the Rich Eisen Show. Okay, so who is your Final Four, Jay?
I had Villanova, Virginia, Michigan, and Michigan State in my Final Four. Now, if I were making those picks now, today, I would probably have put Arizona in there over Virginia simply because Virginia lost DeAndre Hunter, the sixth man of the year in the ACC. He broke his wrist. So he's out the remainder of the year, obviously the tournament. And that's a big loss for Virginia. That's basically taking he was their best NBA prospect. And you take that guy out of the fold. He's a redshirt freshman, so he had some real experience. That's a huge loss for Virginia. Can they overcome it? I think they can, but I wouldn't bet on it.
And so, who do you have in the final game and winning it all then, Jay?
I had Virginia because of the way they defend, but I would obviously rethink that without Hunter, and I had Michigan State. In Michigan State winning it, and it's funny, Rich. Like you try to do all this bracket analysis when the bracket comes out, and factoring in everything that happened during the season and what you've seen. I picked Michigan State at the beginning of the year to win it, and it's remarkable over the years, and I've been at this a while now. It's remarkable how often what you think at the beginning of the year winds up being sort of a better judgment than what you think at the end. And I don't know how to factor all that in, but it's amazing how many times you've had a judgment at the beginning of the year before a ball's been bounced that winds up being more accurate than your end of the year predictions.
So if it's Arizona against Michigan, who do you have winning that one?
I still like Michigan State. Arizona's really good. They don't shoot it quite as well as Michigan State, and I think Michigan State's a little bit better defensively. But Arizona's got DeAndre Ayton. Mm-hmm. And he's the best player in the tournament, and he's a transcendent player. You don't see guys like him very often. He'll be the first pick in the draft, and he'll be an NBA All-Star and be a Hall of Fame caliber talent. And oftentimes in the tournament, if when all else fails and you're making your picks, count the pros and take the team that's got the most pros, because there hasn't been a team that's won in the last 20 years that hasn't had NBA players on it.
Well, I mean, we might as well get to the whole pro conversation then. Jay Bilas here on the Rich Eisen Show. So much conversation, as you know, on shows like this one and shows and this show about the one and done and how the NBA needs to step in and fix what the FBI is attempting to shine a light on. What would you say is the fix here, Jay?
I think the fix is the amateurism piece, which the NCAA will not look at. They won't even entertain the idea. They are all in on this amateurism thing, and I think it's a huge mistake when you've got billions of dollars floating around. And I'll tell you this: that this one and done conversation is just a red herring, because if everybody could go out of high school, it would not change the issues that college basketball faces, because it hasn't changed the issues that college football faces. Reggie Bush was not a one and done, and his family took money from an agent. That stuff happens all the time, and it's going to continue to happen because these players are worth a ton of money, and they're worth way more than a scholarship. So the idea that the one and done is going to be the be all and end all if they let players go out of high school. We had these problems back when players could go right out of high school, and they're not going to go away. And until we allow players to operate in the same marketplace that the coaches and administrators do, we're not going to get anywhere. And the administrators in the NCAA, not just the folks in Indianapolis, I'm talking about all the member schools, the folks that make the rules. They like to somehow say that, well, it's such a great deal that the players get. They're leaving school debt free. They get gear, and look at all the great travel, as if those aren't business trips. And the administrators don't go on those as well, and the coaches. But if it's such a great deal, my thing's always been, if it's such a great deal, let that deal stand on its own in the marketplace, and we'll be fine.
So would you cap what would be paid to players? I mean, because
no.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't.
So,
and the reason is, Rich, there's no spending control in any other area. There's no cap on what coaches make. There's no cap on how big athletic departments can be. There's no cap on how much they can spend on facilities or travel or the like. The only spending control, the only wage ceiling is on players, and that's the lifeblood of teams. Is you are not going to be good unless you have players, and everybody knows it. And that's why they want to keep the lid on this. They don't want to have to compete for talent. And the thing I hear all the time is how complicated this would be. And, these schools, all these schools that we're talking about have 30,000, 25,000 employees. And, if we said, well, geez, what do we do with all these employees? Do we pay the landscaper the same as the president of the university? Do we pay the best professor the same as the worst professor? Like, everybody works hard. This is just too complicated. We shouldn't pay anybody. Let's just give them their expenses, and we don't have to worry about it. That would be silly, and people would laugh at that the same way they should laugh at it with players. And these schools, they know exactly who to recruit, and they know exactly who to put in the game when they need to win. They know exactly who to pay. They just don't want to. So they make up this stuff about, oh, it's so complicated. And, the volleyball player works just as hard as a basketball player. Well, you know what? I think the secretaries of some of these administrators work just as hard as they do. But we're not paying the secretaries the same as we pay the commissioners of a conference.
So then,
and that's not fair. It's just not fair.
So let me just a couple more minutes here with Jay Bilas, extrapolate this out. So Zion Williamson. So would Coach K and Duke be competing with, let's just say, whoever's tanking, the Atlanta Hawks, the Phoenix Suns right now, that Duke would have to come up with more scratch than whatever Williamson would make as the first overall selection in the NBA? How would that work?
Well, if they wanted to, but I think it would be more along the lines of competing with other schools. So just as you would go in for a home visit and make a pitch and say, hey, here's what we can do for you, here's what we can offer, look at our facilities, look at this, you'd say, hey, Zion, we think you're going to be a really good player. We'll offer you X amount of dollars for a 2-year contract to be at whatever. He's going to Duke, so to be at Duke. And then Kentucky can say, we'll offer you X plus 5% or whatever, just like you would with a coach. Like, we're not saying with coaches, geez, what if they go to the NBA? And we're not valuing coaches based upon their value in the NBA, because very few coaches in college would have any value in the NBA or the NFL. They're valued based on this market, the college sports market. So it would really be orderly. You'd offer him a contract, and maybe Zion Williamson and his people and his agent would say, you know what, we don't want Zion to have to be locked into a 2-year deal. We'll take less money for a 1-year deal and the opportunity for him to go pro. And then you can come back at the end of his 1 year and make an offer. If not, maybe he'll transfer and take an offer somewhere else, or maybe he'll go pro. It would really be, the free market works remarkably well for the rest of us. So all they'd have to do is offer a contract. When you sign on the dotted line, you have contract remedies. Everybody's got it. And if anybody messes with your player, like what they call poaching, and I don't see how you can poach an amateur student, but if it's a professional enterprise, then if anybody messes with your player, you've got contract remedies against them, tortious interference with contract. It works very well with the rest of the free world, and the idea that it wouldn't work well for players is patently absurd, really.
That's what helps to have a legal degree with a basketball mind, Jay Bilas. Last one for you. So is Condoleezza Rice's Commission on College Basketball reached out to you to sound these things out?
I've talked with a couple of members of the committee privately, but they have not reached out for me to come in there and testify, if you will, or appear before the committee. And I'm very optimistic. There are a lot of great people on that committee. They're all great people. So I'm optimistic, but cautiously so, because I think the NCAA is already decided to double down on their amateurism piece. And that's not even going to be looked at. They'll look at, whether players should have relationships with agents, or whether they could have endorsement deals. And they'll say no to that, because they'll say, well, that would be a nightmare in recruiting. And we don't want players. We don't want bidding wars. I always thought the bidding war thing was really funny. They don't say bidding war with regard to anybody else. It's just players. Those would be bidding wars. For coaches, it's just business. They don't talk about a bidding war for coaches. That's just business. That's the market, and players have a market too. And all these schools, their scholarships are worth different amounts. They have a cost associated with them, but they're worth different things, and you get different things, different benefits from being at different places. So if the NCAA thinks, hey, your opportunity to market yourself in the tournament is so great, hey, if that's such a great deal, let it stand on its own. And if somebody says, hey, we'll give you the opportunity to market yourself and money, then we'll see where the value really lies. And it actually works out better for the smaller conference teams, because say a place like Wichita State cannot even sniff any of the recruits that Kansas is getting. But if Wichita State can pay, they could pay more to get for their number one target as Kansas's fourth best player, then Kansas could pay that fourth best player. So all of a sudden, these smaller teams could marshal resources to get better players than they could otherwise get. It would actually help the smaller conference teams be more competitive rather than less.
Jay, I hope you get a chance to get in front of that committee. I would love to have your ideas out there like that, Jay.
Yeah, they won't do that, because Mark Emmert's in the room, and I don't think he wants to sit across from me.
Does he think you're coming for his job?
No.
Okay.
I just think they don't want to, like, one of the things, and I say this respectfully because Mark Emmert's a nice guy, but they don't, like, you would think that if their argument was so good that they would be able to justify their positions. But they don't want to make these arguments. The only time Mark Emmert and his brethren make any arguments is when it's got an NCAA logo behind it and they're talking to their own people. So they'll have what they call an open forum, but they're being asked questions by their own people. So it's basically they're singing to one another out of the same hymnal. They never put themselves in a position to have to deal with a contrary opinion. They're all, when they say something, it's just all the same people that are nodding their heads because they're all NCAA folks. And so they don't ever put their arguments out in the marketplace. They just talk to each other.
Jay, I love our chats. Thanks for the time. We'll chat again soon, hopefully.
Always a pleasure, Rich. Great being with you, brother.
Right back at you. Jay Bilas, at Jay Bilas on Twitter.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.